and welcome to our first webinar of the autumn series. Some of you may have joined the webinars that we ran in July, and what we're wanting to do through these is to share best practice, help you learn from what other people are doing, hopefully get some ideas, some inspiration that you can use in your work, and most importantly, be able to ask questions as well, because sometimes it's very difficult to know you have ideas or you're not sure what the latest guidance is. So we're really delighted to have Martin Smith with us today, who is the chair of the Outdoor Education Advisors Panel, and the OEAP are responsible for national guidance on educational visits and school trips. So Martin will be here to bring you up to date with the latest situation. If you have any questions about that, it's absolutely fantastic to have you here, Martin. And we've also got Elaine Skates from the Heart of England Forest. And Elaine's going to be sharing her story of how she's been working with schools through using the forest to work with schools to support them in reintegrating children, re-engaging them with learning and education, and the issues that she's had to go through and how she's overcome them. So it's her story, which hopefully will give you a few ideas about how you could work with schools, or how, if you're from a school, how you can work with providers in your local area. It's really crucial. There's fantastic opportunity learning outside the classroom at this moment in time. It's a really vital tool that schools can use to help people re-engage with learning, to rebuild those relationships. So we're really pleased to have you, Elaine, to share your story. A couple of bits of housekeeping. Those of you who haven't got cameras on, you can have your cameras on if you wish, but please do keep your microphones on mute. It can be, we sometimes get a bit of distraction noise, so keep your microphones on mute, but you can join us visually if you wish to. If you have any questions, there's a chat function down the bottom. So if you just click on chat, there's a hello from me. You just click on there and post any comments or questions that you have. I'll keep an eye on that, and then when we get to the point of asking questions, I'll be able to ask Martin and Elaine. So we found that this is the most efficient way of getting your voice heard, and we're not flicking between numerous screens trying to see who's talking. So pop your questions in the chat function, and I'll keep on top of that. If you have any technical issues, please direct them to Emily by tagging Emily, go @Emily in the chat function. That means that she will get to see the issue and it doesn't disturb Elaine or Martin as they're talking, and Emily will sort that out for you. But hopefully everything should be fine. And I haven't introduced me. Sorry, I'm Justine from the Council of Learning Outside the Classroom. Yeah, Emily and I are here to hopefully, through these sessions, inspire you, as we said, and to support you, to help you do more of what you love doing with more people more often. Okay, so without further ado, I think we've got everyone here now. I'll hand over Elaine from the Heart of England Forest, who's going to share her story.
Hi everyone. Thank you ever so much for joining this webinar today. So this is just my perspective from just one learning outside the classroom provider about how we've been working with schools during these last few really challenging months. So I've prepared a presentation which I will share with you now. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that okay. Is that okay, Justine? Lovely. We are, as I say, just one provider. We are based in Warwickshire, and we're quite new to the learning outside the classroom sector, really. We've only been working with schools seriously for a couple of years. But we have been piloting a different approach, different way of working with schools, whereby we say to schools we're not interested in doing one-off visits because we think longer term progressive programs have more impact. So our schools are a small group of local schools. We focus on a long-term process of regular interactions with the forest. So the schools are typically coming either termly or half-termly with all of their year groups. We focus on the school priorities, what's in their development plan, and we come up with a bespoke programme which meets those priorities. It's very focused on national curriculum outcomes, so we're doing maths, English, DT, science, geography, history, etc. in the forest. So it's not forest school, we say it's school in the forest. Because of our close relationship with schools, we try and offer a lot of flexibility and creative solutions. And because of this quite close working relationship with schools, I think it meant that we were able to start a dialogue with the schools quite early on about how we get them back into the forest, because they were actually quite desperate to come back into the forest. So pre-COVID, we had 7 school partners, and because of the frequency of the visits, with them coming all the time with all of their year groups, that means we're pretty much full. The sessions are co-planned with teachers anyway, so we have a lot of conversation between the senior leaders and the teachers about every session, and it was all going quite well, and then COVID hit us, and obviously the situation changed pretty quickly. So initially we were doing what a lot of you were probably doing if you weren't furloughed, and I know that a lot of people were, but we were just putting out lots on social media, lots of home learning ideas. We wrote to all our schools and we offered to write home learning ideas with an outdoor spin for them. So we were quite busy quite quickly, but obviously not working with children face to face. Until one of our schools came to us and said that they would really like to bring key workers' children to the forest. So that happened around about April time, and it started off with self-led visits, so where we would make sure the toilets were clean and the schools had all the correct sterilised resources ready for them to use, but we wouldn't work directly with the schools. The school staff would come and deliver that themselves. So these self-led visits were happening through April and May, and the schools that weren't coming with their key workers for the self-led visits were, we could tell they were very interested in what the school that was coming was doing. So because of that, we knew that there was quite a lot of interest there, and we just made sure that we were keeping in touch with the head teachers with regular updates and regular offers to support them however we could. So obviously it got to late May, and we knew that schools were planning to go back on the 1st of June. We were keeping a close eye on the guidance for schools that was on the Department for Education website, and starting to talk to schools about their risk assessments and how they were interpreting the government guidance and how they were actually going to put things into practice. And we'd managed to get hold of it's kind of a bit of it was a risk assessment from one of our local authority schools that they very kindly shared with us, and we realised and then we got hold of another one, and we realised it was a bit of a template that the local authority were using, whereby they'd sent a standard model risk assessment out to schools, and schools were making tweaks. So we had a pretty good idea of what was going to be in the school risk assessment. So we risk assessed how we could provide similar measures in the forest, and we produced quite a long document, as you can imagine, about exactly what we were going to do and how we were going to mitigate against the risks of COVID being transmitted in the forest. So once we'd done that, we realised it was an awful lot of information. So we decided to produce an infographic that we could send to the schools so they could at a glance see what we were going to do. So we did 2 infographics. One was, why would you want to come to the forest at the moment? And the other one was, how are we going to facilitate the visit safely? So up on screen at the moment, this is an example of a section of the Why You Should Come infographic. And it wasn't so much to convince schools that they should come, because we knew that our schools were really, really keen to come back, but it was a tool that schools could then use to make the case to parents, many of whom we knew would be really, really anxious about their children coming back into the forest. As you can see, we put out this information, and it was very much about the forest gives you, there's plenty of space here for social distancing. It was really helpful that Department for Education were putting out all that messaging about schools learning outside and delivering the curriculum outside. And we just spoke about the benefits to well-being, giving the kids the space to process the traumatic events of lockdown, re-establishing relationships, giving everyone the chance to play together and learning how to respect social distancing guidelines, celebrating successes and kind of reclaiming that sense of freedom that had been lost during lockdown. And we also, of course, gave out messaging that, of course, they could do national curriculum learning whilst they were here, and that would enable the pupils to catch up on lost curriculum time, because as we all know, learning outside the classroom is so powerful. So we put that out, and we got really good feedback from schools initially. So this is an example, a quote from one of our head teachers at one of our schools about why, you know, they were so desperate to come back in June, and it was very much about checking in with the children, safeguarding so the children could share anything that had happened or anything that they were worried about. So the focus of the reason they were coming was very much around well-being and giving children that space where they felt safe and where they could play alongside adults, so they could address any issues and anxieties that the children had. And this is an example of a piece of work that one of the students did in the forest, that when the world has turned upside down, turn it back round again. We did lots of work around writing and drawing to help them express how they were feeling about lockdown, and that was inspired by a particular text that we worked with. So in terms of the risk management, obviously once we'd established with the schools that they wanted to come in the first place, the next thing that we had to do is reassure them that we could do it safely, and communicate to the school staff but also parents how it was going to work. So we'd asked the schools what they needed, and we made the decision that we would mirror the school's risk assessments, because we felt that children were, you know, taking on board a lot of change and a lot of new rules when they were going back to school. So we didn't want to introduce a different set of rules when the children came back to the forest, which might be very, very confusing. So if the schools said the first thing children must do when they get into school is wash their hands, then the first thing they did when they got to the forest was wash their hands. So that's just one example. Of course, hygiene, we were making sure that they were using, washing their hands, were using hand sanitizer before they ate and drank. That was something that was very, very important. And we said to the schools, look, in order to reduce the risks, everything is going to be outdoors at the moment. Other than the toilets, we're not going to use indoor space at all. So, you know, make sure you come dressed for the weather. If the weather is really awful, then we'll just reschedule the visit. Because we just felt at that time that was really a way of reducing the risk. Obviously, we were working within bubbles. One of the things that we spoke to the schools about in a lot of detail was first aid. Because initially we thought that the school staff should be able to do the first aid, but the schools were finding it really, really challenging to staff the visits because of the pressures of staffing at school, having to teach children in bubbles. So we realised that if we said we will not administer first aid at all, then we knew that for some schools that would mean that they couldn't come. So things like this were very, very much negotiated with each school and working out what the school thought was appropriate. But generally speaking, we said that we had to be 2 metres away from all the staff and students at all times, apart from in the very, very rare instances where we were needing to administer first aid. And that's a really fetching picture of me with all my with all my PPE on, delivering first aid to a child. That was actually at our holiday club. But in this picture, you can see that we installed, you can see part of one of our socially distanced tree stump circles that we put in the forest. Normally we'd have the children all huddled together around a fire pit, you know, usually often keeping each other warm in the winter, because we do visits all the way through the winter. But of course we needed to do social distancing. So the best solution we thought of was getting tree stumps and laying them out in a big circle with 2 meters between each tree stump. Obviously, when the children are playing, they're going to, you know, they're going to be moving in and out of each other's space. Children react like children. But our thoughts were, if at the times when they were sat still for a long period of time, they were 2 meters apart, then that was a really important thing to do. Whereas when the children are running around playing, they're moving in and out of each other's space pretty quickly anyway. And that was something that the schools were happy with. We planned the activities to promote social distancing. So we still did den building, but we just thought about it really carefully about how we did it. So instead of there being a big group of children building dens together, we would say there would be 2 children building dens together. We showed them how to carry the sticks. We spoke to them about they could help each other to carry a large stick or log that was longer than 2 meters. And that was actually quite a good way of reinforcing what 2 meter looks like to children. And then we figured if only 2 children had the den, then you wouldn't get a situation where you had 10 children crammed into the same den. And we communicated our thoughts with another infographic, which again the school could use to give to their TAs and give to their parents, just so that everybody was exactly clear on how it was going to work, to reassure people, but also to make sure that the school staff knew what we were responsible for as Heart of England Forest staff, and what the school staff were responsible for, what people needed to bring, and also communicating the fact that we'd made a decision that we wouldn't be providing teas and coffees to teachers the way we would normally, because we just felt that that would introduce more risk that we didn't need to have. So instead of, normally we'd give children refreshments mid-morning and they'd have squash and biscuits or hot chocolate and biscuits. We just decided that we wouldn't do that, and the children would bring their own drinks, lunch and snacks for the day. So because it was different to what we'd normally do, we needed to communicate that really clearly. So the infographic was a really, really simple way of doing it without people needing to trawl through all of the risk assessment. It was the key points that they needed to know. Overcoming the barriers then, I think definitely what helped us was that we already had these existing close relationships with school staff at all levels. So we knew the head teachers and we knew the TAs really well. And I think that meant that they trusted us, they knew where they were coming, and that took some of the anxiety away. We had direct conversations with the schools to address any concerns. So anything that they saw in our risk assessment that they weren't happy with, we had that conversation. And we had that conversation about how our risk assessment and measures were different to the risk assessment in the school, so that we could make tweaks and made sure, wherever possible, it was exactly the same as the measures that the school had introduced. Another thing we did, which was really helpful, was obviously there are Institute of Outdoor Learning have their local networks, regional networks, I can't remember which one it is, which are really helpful. And then Council for Learning Outside the Classroom have their sector partnerships. So we dialed into the Natural Environment Sector Partnerships meeting in May, because we were interested in what everybody was thinking and really learning from other providers. That was really helpful. But also what we ended up doing was holding informal Zoom meetings, which we had every couple of weeks, with a really small group of providers that are literally on our doorstep. And we felt that was really valuable because we could use each other as a sounding board. I'm worried about this, how, I don't know how to overcome it, and just benefit from each other's expertise. So that was a really, really helpful thing that we did. and we worked with the local providers to do an online event, a doorstep day out, which was for families, not schools, but actually it's enabled us to develop our relationships with local providers, and I think it means we'll work together more closely on other things in the future, so that was really valuable. And the final thing, and I think this was probably the biggest barrier, wasn't it, in summer term, coach travel. You know, how on earth can you get a group of children to a learning outside the classroom venue on a coach and make sure they're socially distanced? It was a really massive problem, and I know it's the reason why a lot of organisations just haven't been able to do anything. And I think we were fortunate because we don't rely on coach travel. A lot of our schools, the parents drop them off in the morning before school at about 8:30. And they pick them up at about 2:30 in the afternoon. So we already had that way of working with schools, which originally was just so that the schools didn't have to pay the coach costs. But actually it was even easier to do this during lockdown because all the parents were working from home. And even schools that were coming on the coach prior to lockdown, they started doing parental drop-off during lockdown so that they could get the kids into the forest. However, we know that this term, a couple of our schools are going to go back to coach drop-off later in the term. So this is another quote from one of our head teachers about there was initial concern about coming to the forest, but the shared risk assessment and infographics helped the school make the case. And subsequently they had fantastic feedback from parents about how delighted they were that the children were able to come to the forest during summer term. So in terms of uptake, we delivered 13 sessions during summer 2020, and the schools were coming for a variety of different reasons. So one of our schools used the visits to the forest to check in with the non-priority year groups that they couldn't bring back to school because they didn't have space for them. And their non-priority year groups, they all came for 2 days in the forest during that time. Transition experiences for year 6, we had several visits that were basically to replace the summer term residential that the schools, you know, the kids had missed out on. And just, you know, they couldn't do their normal transition rituals. So we had a few schools that were coming for that reason. We had another school that was just continuing with their collaborative curriculum learning for priority year groups. And the thing that was really important was that collaboration element, because the schools were finding in school, with social distancing, with the children sat at desks in rows and having to keep apart from each other, the collaborative learning just couldn't happen in school. The children were kind of sat there receiving the information. They'd been having home learning for all this time, you know, so they'd been receiving information and then writing or doing the work, but there wasn't that element of active learning and collaboration and working together and conversation that schools know really supports the children's learning at school. So that was something that they were able to do in the forest, to have that collaborative learning that they weren't able to do back at school. And also other schools were using it for their key workers children with a real mental health focus, because the children were so, you know, really worried about their parents that were key workers, and also because they'd been in school during the restrictions for such a long time. They just wanted them to have that opportunity to get outside and relax and play in a more normal environment. So in terms of impact, these are a few of the quotes that we collected from our schools during this time. So the first quote is about, to start with, they noticed that the children were really hard to engage because they hadn't been using the skills for learning that they normally use at school. So I can remember delivering one session and it was really like pulling teeth it was a literacy focus, and the children just looked absolutely shocked that they were being asked to think and to say something. So I can remember that was a really, really, tough session. And it was tough for the school staff as well. And I think that's when the penny dropped for them, that actually, these skills hadn't been exercised for quite a long time. So that was a real benefit for them. That the forest environment meant that there was opportunities for working with other pupils in a socially distanced way, but where they were still collaborating with each other. The next quote is, despite the additional procedures in the forest, it doesn't feel as different as it does at school. And that's something that I think the children really benefited from, but so did the staff, because it's such hard work, having to think about, are the children far enough apart, that all the new procedures, whereas in the forest, even though we had the procedures, it just felt a lot more natural. Because I think we were then had the responsibility for making sure that everything was safe, I think it gave the school staff a little bit of an opportunity, to just relax a little bit. And I also had this quote from a head teacher, that from the benefit to him, because he could get away from all of the decisions and the anxiety that he was experiencing at school, managing staff's concerns, being worried about keeping the children safe, parents' concerns, and all the extra safeguarding things. And so I got this lovely feedback from him that he had a smile on his face as soon as he came down the drive, and the 6 days he spent in the forest in lockdown gave him 6 precious moments of reprieve. So that mental health benefit to staff was a massive part, I think, of the impact of our summer programme. So moving forward to autumn 2020, we are going to start using the indoor space again. So this is our classroom with all our forward-facing seats, and talking to schools, this is the key thing for them. They're not so worried about the children being 1 metre apart or 2 metres apart anymore, because now, they're working with full class sizes again, and they just can't fit them into a standard classroom socially distanced. But what they want is they want the seats to be forward facing. So this is our layout. We can only fit 24 children in this layout, because normally we'd have them in a kind of U shape to enable us to fit a whole class in. So because of that, we're going to have to do staggered arrivals, staggered departures, and staggered lunch break as well. But we will still keep the children outside as much as possible, because it just makes perfect sense to do so. They're safer when they're outside. The key thing is we're not in the school's bubble, so our staff must keep 2 metre distance away from the children and the school staff at all times. The schools are back to wanting curriculum learning, but they also want the mental health benefits alongside that. And we've also looked at a COVID recovery programme, where children that are really struggling to make the transition back into school can access a 6-week programme, working alongside a very small group of other children, in order to, to just make that transition a little bit easier. So far, we're still waiting to tie up a few definite dates, but we've got 21 sessions booked for October and November so far, and that is 6 out of our 7 schools are coming back. And the other one, I just think they're probably busy, and we've been too busy to ask them what they're doing. So we've had a really, really positive response. So that's kind of enough from me. Another little picture, because I know it's so difficult at the moment, because obviously numbers of cases are going up again. So I think, it's a stressful time again, and we're all constantly having to reevaluate how we're going to do things, and worried about, what's going to happen around the corner. So this is just a little piece of artwork and a quote that one of our children did over the summer, which I just think is lovely. Don't worry, everything has to have an end. And I think as a sector, we will get through it. So that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, yes, hi. I'm pressing the wrong thing there. Thank you, Elaine. That was really, really great. It's so enlightening to see how a provider has addressed the issues that they were faced with, how they've managed to adapt what they're doing, and how schools have responded. So it's very clear to see there is a demand out there. Schools do want this provision. They do want these opportunities for their pupils, and they can see directly the benefit that it leads to both the pupils and to the staff themselves. I mean, please do, if anyone has any questions, pop them into chat box, and I'll keep an eye on that. In terms of, I think it's always good to take, you know, if we can get 5 takeaways from what Elaine said. The things that I picked up were about communicating. Talk to your schools, talk to your providers, keep those lines of communication open, because, you know, everyone wants to do the very best for their pupils. So, you know, what do schools want? What do they need? How can you help? How can you make a difference to the education and the learning that pupils are going through at the moment? This whole issue about and that collaborative point I thought was really key, that due to the structure, the setup of classrooms now, children, I hadn't thought about that, children don't have that collaborative learning quite so much as they used to, of mixing groups, of moving around a classroom. So that is really something that as a provider you're able to fulfill within what you do. So yeah, look at that, talk to schools about that. The other takeaway that I got from that was following school practice, so mirroring what the school does. And schools, you know, teachers do say to a provider, this is what we do in our school, because they'll be, you know, so adaptable and so supportive to help you. And it just makes it easier all round, because you're keeping the interest is on the young people, so they're not having to go through a multitude of changes and different practices and different ways of doing things or different structures. So that's really good. Keep communicating, follow school practice, reassurance. I thought that, again, that came across really strongly from Elaine. Why those infographics which you did, Elaine, I thought they were fantastic. It really broke it down very simply about what the benefits are of doing learning outside the classroom and of using different spaces. I mean, Martin's going to talk about, you know, that schools are still encouraged, the government does encourage schools to go out into different spaces. You know, off-site visits are permissible. So do reinforce those messages about why different spaces help, and how you will do it safely. So it will have, well, the presentation will be on the recording, but I thought those infographics are really good, useful summary points. And that outlining of responsibility, that was key. So being really clear about who is responsible for what, and then there's no ambiguity. I mean, you do that as standard anyway, but you know, knowing exactly where those responsibilities lie. And that learning from others. No one has all the answers. This is the first time anyone's been in this situation before. So don't think that someone out there knows it all and has got it all down to a T. You know, Elaine developed this program, which has worked for her, and she's adapted it and tailored it. Other providers that we had on in July have developed different ways of working. So talk to other providers. Don't feel that, you know, we can't talk to anyone. Set up a little local network or join other networks that are around. But that idea of sharing ideas, sharing problems, talking through different situations just helps everyone. So a couple of questions here, Elaine. Would you wear masks or visors in the indoor session when you start those?
Yeah, so I think the problem is when children arrive, we use the indoor session for the bit where we're communicating with the children, reminding them about the boundaries and the safety aspects they need to remember when they're in the forest. So I feel that if we were wearing a mask at that time over our faces, it would make that communication of that really important messaging a little bit diminished. So what we've done is we have we've got an area marked out on the floor where we know we will stand, and we know that that is 2 meters away from the front desk, and we will be inside as little as we can. Also, the other thing is we won't sit in the classroom on a wet day with the children to eat their lunch. We'll go and have our lunch elsewhere, just to mitigate against that. But at the current time, we're not going to be wearing masks or visors unless the school require us to administer first aid. And in most cases, that is the school's responsibility to deliver the first aid because they're in the pupil's bubble.
Okay. Oh, that's super, thank you. We have another question which I think will actually be more relevant to Martin. So what I'll do is introduce Martin now, because it's really key that we hear from him. So he will bring you up to date with the latest guidance and what advice and support there is out there. The first question before you jump in is, Amy mentioned, I thought that students had to be in bubbles of 15 when on an out-of-school visit. Would you be able to just tell people what the size is? I know there are a multitude of different numbers, groups, bubbles.
Yeah.
You know where we are?
Well, you'd be glad to know we're not part of the rule of 6. So education is exempt from that, and therefore you work in your class bubbles. Of course, secondary, you've got year group bubbles as well, and they'd be able to mix and go out in those year group bubbles. I can't imagine 240 young people going out from secondary school there at this moment in time, but I guess in theory you could do that if you could manage it safely, and it'd be an interesting risk assessment. But yeah, so I think you can be certainly looking at taking class-sized bubbles out and keeping them, you know, basically operating how you do in school, but just stepping beyond the boundaries, obviously. And then we're talking about risk assessments and responsibilities a little bit later. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think that clears that point up. There's a lot of confusion over numbers and what's allowed where, but education is exempt from that rule of 6, and making that very clear, and you're working on class-sized bubbles. So over to you now, Martin. Martin, as I mentioned, is chair of the Outdoor Education Advisors Panel, which produces or is responsible for the national guidance. So that is where to go. There's a website. If you've got any questions, go on there. Talk to your local OEA as well. Every region has one. They are the font of all knowledge and are absolutely brilliant help. So Martin, if you can go on.
Thanks, Justine. I'll go into a slideshow in just a minute, but I'm looking to cover sort of 6 areas really of where we draw on guidance to sort of come to, you know, our own framework for working. There's DFE, of course, which we all work from somehow. We then draw down from that within the Outdoor Education Advisors Panel into something called national guidance. So we distill some of that work and just focus and relate it to educational visits. And then, of course, the key thing for all of you folks out there, and me, because I'm an education advisor as well, working in a trust, is what your employer states. And so it's what they then interpreted from all those different bits of guidance. That's what you have to work to. We'll then look at, you know, some guidance about how best practice about going outside, and what we've heard from Elaine, I think from my perspective as an advisor, shows some really good practice, and Justine has picked up on some key points. And then look at issues around safe places to go, and then just about where we can go find some further advice. So I'll try and get you now to share the screen, and then we can just take you through that gently. There we go. Share. Okay. So this is our starting point, DFE guidance. I'm sure you're all phenomenally familiar with this, word for word, but some of the key points for me obviously relate to educational visits, and I've just drawn them out there. Obviously, at the moment, many of you will know that overnight visits are not allowed, and that's going to remain the case up until the end of December. It's not been published yet, so that will be coming out, and then there'll be a review undertaken in November as to when and how any future opening of overnight stays is likely to happen. However, the good news, I guess, on the flip side of that coin, is that local visits and educational visits, as long as they're not involving an overnight stay, can take place. And one of the great things for me there, the statement there, that schools should sort of make use of these in support of the curriculum. So there's a very sort of strong comment there from the DFE themselves, making it very clear that they see this as a valuable thing to be doing on all sorts of levels in talking to them. So it's not just about sort of helping to manage good hygiene and enabling social distancing to take place more easily, but also it has a massive value, as Elaine has shown us, in terms of supporting your work, and more importantly, I think, helping young people reacclimatise to school, and also helping staff. And that sort of well-being issue has been highlighted, I think, numerous times in conversations I've had with people at various levels. So that's a great thing too. So that's our national, that's where we're pulling it off from centrally. Then as an outdoor education advisors, we then, actually get moving forward. Whoa. There we go, sorry, it's got me little buttons working. There you go. So then we have our own website where we draw down the best bits of that and distill it in relation to educational visits. The site's there. It doesn't just cover, I'm happy to say, coronavirus stuff. It covers everything else to do with outdoor visits, all you'd need to know, really. So there's a great sort of baseline there you can always refer back to. And I'm hoping that most employers that you work with, when it comes to educational visits, will recognise this. And certainly nearly all outdoor education advisors will be drawing on this as well, as I do, to support me in what I say. Over the last few months, we've been updating a section just in relation to coronavirus. And that's sort of, we call it 4.4K, I think. And those are the areas that we're covering. So again, we've directed people to government guidance, and there has been a plethora of it, which has made things quite complicated. I mentioned changing rooms in schools, but that's an interesting one. So we're staying outside because it's much easier. Got guidance there from across both England and Wales that we covered, but obviously we're just focusing perhaps just on England. And then other areas of specific advice within visits themselves, travel. One issue about outdoor advisors and schools have been having to deal with, obviously, over the last few months is managing financial issues around cancelled visits, but we perhaps won't go there today. We'll look at some more positive thing about just being outside. So that's where you can go and find that. It's on the Outdoor Education Advisors Panel website. You've just seen the link there, and it should be fairly easy to find from the home page. So how do we then make sense of it for our particular situations? Well, what we should be doing, well, your employer, local authority, trust will have their responses, their operating procedures, which you have to work by, and then all the risk assessments linked to that. So I'm hoping there will be something in there for you that enables you to get outside and work both around the school grounds, but also off the school site as well. What they're saying here from the DFE, their schools must comply with health and safety law, of course, and they're now taking very much the view that they're seeing all this COVID stuff under an overarching umbrella of health and safety and all the regulations we have to work with under the Health and Safety at Work Act. And in fact, now, I don't know if any of you are aware, but the HSE are doing inspections of schools to make sure that the school sector, the education sector, is fulfilling its duty and following the necessary guidance to operate safely. So your school may get a phone call out of the blue. They will discuss all your arrangements with you on the phone. If they're happy with that, that's great. You won't hear from them for a little while. But then if they've got questions, they will come back to you, and they might even have a site visit. So those are happening. Some of you may or may not be aware, but just to raise the flag if you weren't. So there's our guidance. What we can also draw on is other areas of support to give us ideas about how we can best manage being out and about. And the Outdoor Advisors Panel, working with the Council for Learning Outside the Classroom, pulled together this particular document, which you can find on the CLOtC website, I'm happy to say. And it goes through, again, a series of things that you might be having in the back of your mind about working outdoors. I mean, probably the third one down, key considerations, is the one that you're supposed to be best focused on. And I'll touch on that in just a minute. But also there's ideas and how you can adapt our various activities to work within social distancing. And also towards the end of there, it's got a really useful toolkit and audit about how you can best go around delivering outdoor learning, both in the current situation, but more importantly, how effective it can be in terms of integrating with the school curriculum. And actually, if you do that, you're marching on your way to schools mark for CLOtC, and maybe more of that later on. So just looking at perhaps one of the main points there, which is the considerations. In that section, these are the areas that are covered. So it's looking about how we can maintain social distancing. And I know certainly in schools, it's one heck of a challenge. I'm vice chair of Nottingham Nursery, and I'm telling you now, it's almost impossible. But you can, we try our best. And at the end of the day, I think most of us are just trying to ensure that young people are sort of a really welcoming point in like coming back to school. It's been so important for many young people, and the smiles on people's faces when they have done, it's been phenomenal. But our challenge now is maintaining all the operating procedures we've got in and around to protect them and staff, and make sure that continues through while this situation exists. So we're looking there at how you can move groups outside, looking at how you manage different participants, range of activities, about cleaning equipment, clothing, first aid, weather, hygiene. And hygiene's the key thing, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is just manage that effectively. Good hygiene and a bit of social distancing go a heck of a long way. Just on that as well, learning through landscapes, produced that document on the left, social distancing in school grounds. It's, again, it's a really good, for a visual learner like me, it's got lots of pictures on the second page in particular about how you can best manage outdoor learning around the school grounds, and you can apply that and take it beyond. So the link is there as well, and that's well worth a look at if you get a chance. So those considerations, I'm sure I have some questions about that. I could go through lists and bits of hints of things to do, perhaps in a few, perhaps when it comes to those questions. But then how do you know you've got a good provider? Well, if you went to Elaine's place, I'd say you've got a pretty good provider there, because one of the key things for us is making sure you have that excellent communications between yourselves and who you're going to. But if you don't know the provider well and what you do, well, there's a couple of things you can look out for. On the left-hand side there, you may be aware of the quality badge. So providers who meet the requirements of the CLOtC quality badge will be proudly displaying that, I hope. And that certainly takes a lot of questions away from you when you go and visit somewhere. You'll know that the insurance has got risk assessments in place. They're keen to link it to your particular requirements. So that's a great starting point. And then what the quality badge group have done then is linked it to something called CADI. And this is a little bit like a school trips advisor. Did I say that? And you can go on there and look for particular places to go, and it will highlight not only whether they got the quality badge, but also whether they're displaying the HSE COVID secure statement. And that will be another layer of, if you like, support for you when you're making the decision of where to go. And you can either find CADI through this website. It's been produced by EduFocus, who produce Evolve, and some of you might be familiar with the Evolve on-site visit planning system. You can easily access it through there as well, through one of the buttons. So in terms of where to go when you do decide to get outside, and I do hope you will, and go beyond the school grounds and extend beyond the local area and get out and do some visits a bit further, then these are the sorts of things you can refer back to. And then I guess sort of finally, it's where else can you go for advice and support? I'm hoping that you're all aware that most of you should have access to an education advisor, either through the local authority or through the academic trust. If you're uncertain, you can go on the website here, and there's a find an advisor button there which will link to your particular geographic area. We are looking to, it's a bit ropey, I will say, I'll be honest with this. So we're looking at developing the find an advisor thing a little bit further. We'll put a link shortly on National Guidance homepage, which have a much more secure link to finding an advisor. So that's where you can go and ask for further advice and support. So I think I've left it fairly short. So if there's time for questions, which I guess there might well be, then there's the opportunity to do that now. Let me come
that's absolutely brilliant. I know it did, you know, we could spend all day talking about national guidance and what's on there. It is a fantastic resource. So whether a teacher or a provider, do go on there. It has the latest information. That is update. I mean, we've been updated multiple times a day when the whole COVID thing blew up. So it does have the very latest information on there, the very latest guidance for both providers and for schools to follow. So do make sure you're familiar with where that website is. Do have a look at it if you've got any questions, or if you're approached by a school and you've got questions about what you're able to do, the answers will be on there. And a couple of other things which Martin mentioned, which I thought was really good. I mean, encouraging schools to get off-site, to come to you, or schools, teachers do take your groups off-site. That is permissible. The Department for Education did say that educational visits are permitted. So do encourage schools to come to you, or teachers do go out off-site. But also providers, you can go onto school sites as well, as long as you adhere to your work with your school and adhere to their guidance regarding COVID management. Do talk to school, and teachers, if you're not able to go off site at this moment for whatever reason, do get providers to come to you. They're all very willing and able to adapt their practice, adapt their service, and what they can do with your students, and deliver it in multiple different settings. So do have that conversation. It all comes back to communication. Do talk to people, find out what they need, where it can happen, when it can happen, how it can happen. And the other point, which was, thank you for mentioning it, Martin, is the Learning Outside the Classroom Quality Badge. This is the national accreditation for schools, for providers, sorry. that schools can see very quickly and easily that it meets certain standards regarding risk management and quality of education provided. And it also means that they have that statement from CADI that they are COVID compliant, so to speak. So do look for providers who have that providers. If you want to get a quality badge, do get in touch. We can take you through which level is right or which route is right for you. But that is endorsed by the Department for Education, and the Department for Education do encourage schools to look for that accreditation when they're planning off-site visits or using providers. So that's it from me. Thank you. Does anyone have any direct questions for Martin about any of the guidance, locations, numbers, what we can do, or what you're able to do, where and when? To Northern Ireland and Denny. Yeah, do you know anything about Northern Ireland, Martin, by the way? You know, I know this doesn't cover, you in particular don't cover Northern Ireland, but do you know what systems they use?
No.
Put you on the spot there.
I'm not a clue. I mean, I do because I'm also chair of the Outdoor Council, so I do work with colleagues in Northern Ireland. And I'm not sure, I mean, apart from the fact they've got some really good guidance around early years and stuff like that, I'm not sure where they're at the moment with all their particular guidance to Northern Ireland and stuff.
So right, this guidance, it covers England and Wales. Does Scotland have its own guidance?
Yes.
SAPO? Yeah.
So
in
Scotland, then there's guidance developed by SAPO, and they're sort of working with the Scottish government as well quite closely around further guidance and bits and pieces. So they're pretty well organised up there around some of this.
Yeah, great. And is there any advice about coach travel? Do pupils have to be distanced on the coach if they're travelling to a venue?
Right. Again, what you will find in the DFE guidance, the nearest we've got is some guidance around home to school travel. So you can go and have a look at that. As far as we're aware, if they're in the class bubble going on a coach, sitting alongside each other, logic sort of says in your mind, though it doesn't always work with some of the guidance we get, that they're sitting down in the same way they would be in a classroom. And the key issues, I guess, around using coaches about you need to know how often they're being cleaned, have they been cleaned before they got in there, because the young people wash their hands, put some gel on hands before they get on there, when they get off. Obviously, don't use the toilet if there's one on there. So it's about then just managing behaviour and good practice when you're on the coach, working with a coach operator. But logic, for me, would say it would make some sense that you could use a coach, because there's obviously got good guidance. And it's worth referring back to the DFE guidance, which is easily available about home to school travel. That will give you some steers into it. The national guidance as well, we've also got a section on coaches, on travel, on the OEAP guidance. Obviously, the thing that would limit you is that obviously not using public transport would be the key thing at the moment. Steering away from that. You might well have your own minibus, in which case that's okay, as long as it's cleaned regularly and between classes it's cleaned, etc., etc. So you can put into some, really safe and sensible procedures which will minimise the spread of infection, because that's what we're talking about. How do we minimise that effectively?
Right. So in terms of if a school went to an outdoor centre, for example, for a day activity, and the outdoor centre had taken them maybe to a crag or something on their minibus, is that okay? Is there any guidance around an outdoor, school may get the pupil to there.
Yeah,
what about the outdoor centre?
Again, talk to the place you're going. They'll be very aware of this. So that bus should have been cleaned after the last group that used it. If you're using it and that class bubble stayed the same throughout, then yes, they can get on, use it and be taken there. Drivers have to wear a mask. So that's all those sorts of things which you just transfer across from one situation to the other. Look for consistency throughout and operate as close to your own school operating procedures as you possibly can. As Elaine highlighted, if you discuss that with the provider, if the provider can be as good as Elaine and actually adapt their procedures to fit you, great. But there'll be some specific procedures with the place you're going that might be unique and you have to comply with that. So it's a balanced approach. It's good to talk.
Yes, I thought just this what I was going to say is that I think it all does come down to communication. talking to schools, explaining what you need to do to ensure safety, and find out from the school. School talk to the providers about what your requirements are and see how you can meet together. There may be things as a provider, if you're running activities in different locations, that you need to do to ensure you're complying, and the school may not be aware of. And schools, you may have your own guidance that you need to kind of work with the provider to ensure that they comply with. So talk to each other, keep those lines of communication going. I work for a water company. Yes, someone said they started outreach in local schools, and some are accepting visitors. Thank you, Emma. That's really helpful.
Good.
Yeah, there's many risk assessments involved. So if you are going onto a school site, you just got to keep talking, find out what you can do, how you can adapt, and how you can work with schools to make it as easy as possible for everyone involved.
I mean, just on that, Justine, obviously, if you're a provider going into school, you need to comply with the operating procedures that are in place in the school that you're going to. In the same way, if I visit any of our schools, I've got to read through their own individual risk assessments before I go on site. So it's about, you have to work then within the body of the operating procedures, the location you're going to.
Do think about your venue. Yeah, great. Well, that is fantastic. We are nearing the end of our hour, and I've learned an awful lot from both Elaine and Martin. I hope you have too. I hope you found it really useful. If you have any questions that we haven't managed to address here or that come to you after the event, do drop either Emily or me an email and we'll pass them on to Martin and Elaine. As I said, the presentation will be recorded and we'll send you a link to that recording. We have a whole host of future events happening over autumn, so please do register for more webinars. These are all here to help you to share best practice, to share ideas and give you some of the answers that you might be struggling for at the moment. Do let us know if there's things that you want to hear about. We're here for you, so if there's particular questions or areas or things you'd like to know about, let us know and we'll see what we can do. But thank you once again, Martin and Elaine. Thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay. Bye.
Cheers.